All right, we are live. Welcome to this panel event where we're going to be talking to four great leaders from our industry about the transition from being an accounts executive into leadership. If you are joining us, particularly if you're in England or Iran, thank you very much, because we know the England game is ongoing. It's actually a bit of a relief that England, for me anyway, and I think looking at the demographic of a lot of our audience, that they're doing all right. I think the last count was like 5-1 up or something like that. So I'm not going to say those words about something coming home or anything like that, because I'm not going to be the one to jinx it this year. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So before we jump into the panel, a stat that literally blew my mind recently was that, did you know that the average 6-1 I hear. Thank you very much. That's good news. Did you know that the average tenure of a sales leader in today's world is now down to around 18 months? 18 months. And if you think about it, you've got to count at least a quarter to ramp. So we're only really talking 4 or 5 quarters of active leadership before companies are making a change, which is kind of crazy, isn't it? And the thing that we're noticing still happening a lot, is that companies are still quite happy to roll the dice on bringing in outside leadership rather than promoting from within. Yet we see time and time again just how successful it is to promote from within. Basically, what they're choosing is an unknown entity where they can see that they perhaps have leadership experience over somebody who is a known entity who, let's be honest, if they're being considered for promotion, they are a culture fit. They probably have a great work ethic. They know your product. They know your space. They know all those processes and oddities internally that you have. The thing they miss is leadership, which is the ultimate catch-22, isn't it? Because you're effectively saying, come back when you've got some leadership experience, but how do you get leadership experience unless you trust someone to step up? And there's no curriculum, there's no degree, all this kind of stuff. So most people are really relying on their own intuition to make that step up. They may be basing it upon previous leadership experience they've had from former leaders, and that can be both good and bad. So today's panel, really, we've invited 4 great sales leaders, some who have made the step up very recently, some like Penny have been in leadership longer and have actually promoted people in her teams along the way. So without further ado, let's get into it, where we're going to get to meet the panelists. And I'm going to ask them a few very simple questions: their name, what company they work for, their role within that company, and how long they have been in leadership. Let's start with Marina. Welcome to the panel, Marina. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So yeah, I said your name. So where you
That's a good start. Hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining. So my name's Marina Ayton. I am one of the regional directors at Zscaler. I look after our majors business there, which is effectively, some of the largest global organizations, big banks, big pharma, all of those kind of companies. And I have been in leadership in a couple of different roles at Zscaler for the last 2 years. So I'm pleased that I am over the average of that nice stat that you gave, Andy. Thank God. So yeah, excited to be here.
Welcome, Marina. Thank you very much. Let's go over to Pim. Hi, Pim.
Hi there, Andy. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here. I think that we were actually planning on doing this session one time before this, right? And at the time, I was still with my last company, which was Meraki, part of Cisco. And in the meanwhile, between then and now, I actually joined your organization. So I look after the revenue team here at MEDDICC today. I think if I count, it might be my 3rd leadership role currently, if you consider the B2B tech sales. So yeah, excited to be here. And I think one of the questions is, when we see England play, how do you say it? Is it coming home or not, right? So yeah.
We're not jinxing it, not saying those words until at least the second round. That's how long we'll wait. Thank you so much, Pim. Penny, hello again. How are you?
Hello again. Hi, I'm good, thanks. Thanks for inviting me. So my name is Penny Orme. I am COO of the Enterprise Container Solution business at SUSE. So that's all of our enterprise container software globally. My role is looking after the global go-to-market strategy, so aligning marketing, sales, channel, customer success. Also, I run the global SDR functions and also the sales specialist teams. SUSE, for anyone who doesn't know, is the largest European open source company, so open source technology. And I've been in leadership maybe 9-10 years now in various roles.
Thank you very much, Penny. And last but no means least, Lucy, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So I am Lucy Williams-Jones. I am 1/5 of the Northern EMEA leadership team at Datadog, who are a monitoring and analytics platform for the cloud. I have been in leadership around coming up 2 years, about 19 months, if we're going to be precise. So I'm just under your stat, which now I feel really bad. So maybe, maybe I should watch out.
You've made it through. I'm sure, like any stat, once you're past that 18-month period, it's fine. It's all good. Don't worry. Don't lose any sleep about it. Good stuff. Well, let's jump in then. I'll go back to you, Marina. Could you share with the audience how you got into leadership? Like, I think everyone on the panel, everyone started as an individual contributor. So how did you move into leadership? What was your route?
Yeah, of course. So I think ever since I started in sales, which was in about 2016, I'd always been interested in leading a team and leadership. But I don't think I ever really realized what that meant. I spent my first part of my career in a sort of small technology startup, then realized had moved into leadership in that startup, but had realized I had absolutely no process to what I was doing. And I started kind of managing people, and I felt very uncomfortable about that because I was teaching them things that I really had assumed that I just got lucky and there was no science behind it. And that led me to AppDynamics, where I spent the early stage of my career, and now to Zscaler. And I think moving from an AE into kind of leadership, my route was probably quite similar to everyone's. I had become very consistent in the performance I was giving as an AE. So I'd hit back-to-back 200% years all the way through AppDynamics, and also all the way through Zscaler. And I think I'd started to form this kind of, like, I guess, unconscious competence around sales process, what one should do next in a deal, leveraging your ecosystem and channel and all of that stuff, that I think the leaders around me decided that maybe that skill that I'd learned would be better placed scaling it across an organization where I could teach people to do the same thing. Now, it wasn't a particularly easy decision to say, yes, that sounds like a great idea, because I think, and I'm sure, Lucy, you have the same thing, right? If you moved only 2 years ago, is that decision from being responsible just solely for yourself, and, you know, in control of the revenue that you're doing, the money that you take home at the end of the month, like there's something very easy about that life once you've got into it. So it wasn't, I didn't say yes straight away, and it was definitely a difficult decision, but now I'm very pleased I've done it.
I love that, Marina. And I think it's no mean feat to get those kinds of performances as an individual contributor in any company, let alone the ones you mentioned, which is something that would suggest that in that role, you're not just kind of looking after yourself, but you're looking after yourself very, very well. One of the challenges I'd love to throw straight to the panel here is that kind of challenge about, if you've been a successful individual contributor, then you take on a team. How do you get over that idea of, like, you know, I'm so used to being in control of my own destiny, and now I'm kind of having to control the destiny. Like, it's almost like your control is kind of diluted because you're now having to kind of by proxy control other people's destinies. I'll ask you that one, Penny. I'm sure you've seen that challenge time and time again.
It's actually a bit of a journey, to be honest. I mean, I went from SDR to AE, and then into management, also very similarly to Marina, very, very top performer year on year. Actually didn't want to go into management because actually for many years I resisted, because actually you can earn a lot more money and have a lot more flexibility when you're actually an individual contributor. I think you made a really good point, Marina, which was the thing I had to battle with, was how do I make people successful in the team? I know how I make myself successful, but what makes me successful doesn't necessarily make everyone else successful. And I think that was one of the biggest learning curves, was recognizing that I had to be open-minded. There are more than one way to do something and more than one way to be successful, and they can be very different. And actually, bringing that in itself, that realization brings diversity into your team, because what you don't want is to have lots of mini yous in your team, when actually we've got to reflect the type of customers we have who are diverse in their nature of communication and style and how they want to interact with us. So I think that was the biggest learning curve. And it took me some time, right? I fell down, I maybe upset some team members, but I had training, and I actually got a coach and a mentor, which I know we're going to talk about later.
Brilliant. And I'm gonna come over to you, Lucy, there with something, which is that I actually, the last time I think I said this was at MEDDICC, and you corrected me because I said you were 21 times in a row President's Club winner. I think you said no, Andy, it's actually 22 now. But you can, yeah. So that's quite a feat.
Love data or anything.
Say it again. Sorry.
Not that I love data or anything.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But I know that the vast majority, I think maybe even 20 of those President's Clubs were as an individual contributor, and correct me if I'm wrong there. So how does someone, what Penny was talking about there about sort of not really wanting to go into leadership because the rewards are often richer as an individual contributor. How did you get your arm twisted? Because I'm sure it wasn't the first time someone asked you to make that jump.
No, it wasn't. I think, we covered it going back for about 2 years ago now when we first started chatting. But so I had been an IC since 2000. I fell into software when I was 18, when I went and worked for Quest Software. And I was, doing my thing for 20 years. I then got sick with COVID and my life flashed before my eyes. And I thought I've learned so many cool things from so many great people, leaders in the past, that I wanted to go and kind of like pay it forward, pass it on. I wanted to do it in a safe environment and somewhere where I'd been successful. So I spoke to the leadership team at Datadog and they were really supportive of it. But it definitely wasn't in my kind of immediate career plans. But as probably like Marina said, I'm really glad I did it when I did. And now I love it. But it is definitely a massive shift from your day to day. But yeah, I kind of went into it because I didn't want to not pass forward what I'd learned. And it's loving it now.
I think that's one of the most rewarding factors of sales leadership is, by nature of everyone on this call, top performers. And that's great. But I think, there's so much more about me personally speaking for myself about bringing more people on and helping them through is almost like I can always remember the promotions and the pay rises much more than I can like the quarters we won and, the targets we hit. So that's something I think is really, really important. And so Pim, question over to you, sir. What was your journey? How did you get into sales leadership from acting as an IC?
Well, definitely not by getting into President's Club 22 times. Made it a few times though, but So I think that for me, it always felt like there was going to be a point in my career where I wanted to sort of give back everything that I have learned up until then and sort of empower other individuals to do similar things, right? And if I then think about, say, the last 10 years of my career or so, there was an opportunity for me to get into leadership earlier than I did. And I made the decision back then to stay on like an IC path to first get into something that we would then define as inside sales onto an enterprise kind of sales role before getting into leadership, right? And so I think that if I look at my journey, it was always about sort of doing the things that were part of the role that I wanted to have before I actually had the role, right? So the not having the title yet, but demonstrating that I was sort of thinking about our goals as a team and the activities that would lead to a better opportunity to hit those goals and ultimately carrying myself in such a way that by the time that the company would have the opportunity or the need for another leader, that it was basically a no-brainer. And then for me to be seen as someone that could take on more. And then one of the two sometimes speeds up the other. But I guess that was my journey in a nutshell.
I love that, Pim. Question back to you, Marina. What's the one thing that's, that kind of classic, what would you teach yourself now when you were first taking that step into leadership? What's the one thing you wish you'd known then that you really know now?
Well, I think arguably, like most people that are put into leadership positions probably don't have the right training or the right experience, nor probably an understanding of what leadership even is before they go into it. So, and I was no different to that. I think the one thing that I would probably tell myself is that leadership is predominantly about influence rather than about power. And I think it's very easy for people to move into leadership because you've got a bigger title and you get to make people decisions and you give people pay rises, or you figure out that people aren't right for specific roles. But in my view, you don't get anywhere with your team unless you're able to inspire them, tell stories, recognize people for their work, and really become pretty selfless, to be honest. Like, I don't have kids, but I imagine being a leader of like a high performance, hyper growth team is a bit like having 5 children. And so it's really hard work, but you have to put them first in everything.
I love that. Penny, I see you nodding. Do you love your sales team like you love your children?
Ooh, I can't answer that direct question.
This is being recorded as well.
No, definitely not. I adore myself. No, so I mean, I've managed teams directly, and then I've managed managers of teams, and then I think as you go into leadership, the skill sets kind of evolve and change, and the requirements change, right? So when you have your sales team to start with, which I first started with, yes, it was all about motivation and understanding what made them tick. So I think the wish that I had, I agree with Marina, there is not enough training around. And it's not just about sales processes and how to run a QBR or a one-to-one. Actually, some of the best training we had was some of the kind of Myers-Briggs things, or coaching around your own personality type and communication skills. So if you've got an introvert and you're an extrovert, how do you communicate? If you're left brain, data-driven versus big picture, blue sky thinker, how do you communicate to motivate? And so it was really about team first. So you go from individual contributor, IC, to team first. And I think it's about motivating and then thinking about them ahead of yourself. And Simon Sinek often talks about it, but it is genuinely true, always thinking about your team first, because we're really there to serve them, not the other way around. So I think that was the thing. I wish there'd been a Simon Sinek around back. I'm a bit older than everyone a few years ago.
I love that. Question to you, Lucy. What's the one thing you wish you'd known now, which when you were just starting those 19 months ago?
It probably is around the people, actually. I think, Marina, you had it. I don't have children either, right? So I think it's around the people and how everyone is different, and what you have done yourself may not work for person A or person B, but also person C may be completely different. And it's that introvert versus extrovert. I had this conversation with someone the other day around different personality types and how you have to treat everyone very differently. And I think it's definitely that. And I probably made some oopsies and mistakes when I first took on my leadership role. I'm sure we've all done that at some stage, trying to treat everyone and work with everyone in the same way, but actually everyone's different. So yeah, I think, and if someone could write a book on it, I think we'd probably, or one of us could write one on it, we'd probably all be very, very rich. But no, definitely personality types and people types is definitely one for me.
I love that. Very, very true. Very, very. I think, I'm sure everyone listening along that's been in those shoes is like I am. I'm finding myself thinking, yeah, you know what? That's something that really caught me out as well. How about you, Pim? What's the one thing you wish you'd known when you were first getting into leadership that you know now?
Yeah, I think similar to what Lucy said. So I'll actually throw something in that is a little bit like after you get into after you actually get the position, right? So I always sort of, in my mind, before getting into a position as such, I think I considered it a bit of a destination, but really it's just an extension of the journey that you're already on, right? So the message in that is that even when you do get to that point, don't feel like you have to know everything already. Don't feel like you cannot make mistakes anymore, right? And do not feel that you only focus on like the individuals in your team, because as a leader, you're sort of in the middle of that team and the rest of the organization. And with that, I mean, whatever is above that, right, in terms of senior management, all the way back up to I guess the headquarters for most of us, sometimes located in other countries, but also the teams around that, right? And so that's something that I sort of realized, I think only after getting into a position like that. It's like, okay, now I'm here. This is not my destination. This is again another starting point and like a continuation of the path that I was already on.
Yeah.
Can I just say on that point, you raised a really good point about we talk about managing the team, but managing across function, peers and upwards is just as important as well. Because that's another minefield you don't think about. So how do you collaborate with marketing, with whoever else that you're codependent on? And then also, how do you manage upwards, right? And so that, I think it was a good point you raised that we didn't talk about before.
Yeah. Spot on. So there'll be a lot of people listening, a lot of people tuning into this. I know that from people that told me that they're looking forward to the event, who are considering, is a career in sales leadership right for me? Is this something that I should go into? And I think there's this sort of, I think a bit of a lazy adage that, great salespeople don't make great sales leaders, which is kind of obvious because they're different professions to a degree. one is looking after people and one is looking after yourself, as we've already discussed. But I think this panel is kind of an example of there is, kind of, although it's not a foregone guarantee that if you're a good salesperson, you'll be a good sales leader, it doesn't mean that they're disconnected. And so I'd love to hear from the panel, perhaps go back to you, Marina, just to hear about what things you think would be things you'd be, if you were advising someone, what characteristics, what traits do you think someone who has a good foundation to be a good sales leader has?
Yeah, so I think before you even think about whether you can be a sales leader or not, or whether it's the right time to move, credibility is the number one thing that you have to think to yourself. Am I credible in this space? Have I built a track record that is defensible, and will people believe in me? Because before you even decide whether you can or not go into it, I think if you don't believe that you can do it, and then no one's going to follow you, right, in that space. So for me, I think there are a few things. It definitely can't be money as your motivator anymore. That you have to remove that, and maybe when you get to Penny's level, maybe that comes back around. But right now, it's not about making more money than your reps, that's for sure. Secondly, I think patience. Again, Lucy said, it's about the people. Not everyone is the same at all, and I think it's definitely taken a lot more patience, just because, as reps, particularly, we are so go, go, go all the time. We can't necessarily expect every single person on our team to behave in the same way. And I think the other thing that I'd say is that you really need to be able to inspire a group of people, because without a common goal, the skills to simplify a plan. And, Penny talked about managing the ecosystem, marketing, managing up, particularly when you work in these hyper-growth SaaS companies. There's a lot of noise everywhere. And as a leader, for me, it's my responsibility to simplify the plan, to make sure that, in situations that might be quite complex, we break it down together, make decisions based on that, and really simplify the tasks.
I love that, Marina. What do you think, Pim? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I also think that once you get there, it's for me, it was about getting real with my team, right? And the team that I have right now as good as I know that team, right? So that's a bit of a funny situation, but I believe that there are people in my team who are better than me at selling, and juniors in the team that are potentially better at selling down the line as well. And so I want them to feel that way, because I'm simply there to empower them to do the best possible job, right? And so when you get in, it's sort of to create that cultural environment where people feel like they can be real, they can be vulnerable, so that we can focus on the stuff that really matters, right? And I think that has always gone a long way for me.
Cool. Is there anything you'd say to that, Lucy, about things that they should sort of judge themselves on, traits you think you would sort of say are going to be strong in leadership?
Well, I actually wrote them down, and Marina, you'll be pleased to know that my 3 were exactly the same as yours.
Oh, wow.
So, patience. I actually had patience as number 1 rather than number 2. Then I had inspiration. So, it's not just about shouting at scoreboards. A lot of the SaaS companies that we all work for are very KPI leading indicator driven. But actually, I think you have to, and as an IC, you live and die by those KPIs. And did I hit my meeting metric this week? Have I moved and pressed my pipeline forward? You've got to take yourself away from that, because actually what you're trying to do is not look and shout at the scoreboard. You're trying to help people move forward with their deals, or help them get to a point where they are hitting the indicators without kind of using them as a stick, I guess. And data, I'm a massive data head. So I think if you can help take a number of points from any individual and then try and, as Marina said, break it down to kind of I guess, format a discussion or a proposal or a sales cycle to help move forward, then that's super important. And being good with data, because you're going to need it for everything. You're going to need it for forecasting. You're going to need it for comp reviews, because everyone's always got a problem with comp. So you're going to be able to take that data. And I was the worst at it, by the way, when I was in IC. But yeah, you need to be, I think, data driven. And also credible. I think, Marina, you mentioned on credible. We're going and accelerating those conversations probably with EBs +1, whoever. So you need to be credible in your space. I always said that if I ever left Datadog, I'd want to go and be a salesperson wherever I went next, even if I had leadership in mind. Because I think if you've sold the product, sold the process within an organization, when you then become a leader, you're probably going to be able to kind of navigate sales cycles slightly easier. So I think having that credibility and of actually learning it from day one is really, really important.
Yeah. And Lucy, I'll just add, also, having a credible track record over a number of years, right? Because everyone can have a big year as an anomaly, but unless you've got the track record of 3-4 years of exponential performance, I think it's always better to wait till then.
I'm going to throw in a little spanner into that one, actually, because actually it becomes quite difficult as you go up in your management career to do that, because that would mean you'd have to take 2 steps back every time to learn. So there are different ways of proving it to be credible, other than just being, I think for your first role, I get that. I think as you go forward, people just be cognizant of the fact that you can have led a team that were incredibly successful and therefore could move into another sector that could also be successful because you've shown that in prior track records. So, because I used to feel that way all the time. So it's so funny you said that. And then actually I've moved into open source, for example, which is technology I have no track record in at all. But I've led teams in other sectors and had success and used the learnings of a go-to-market strategy, processes and management skills to take with me into the next role.
Super interesting. I particularly like what you said there, Lucy, around data, and it ties in so closely what Marina was saying about credibility, because I think one of the things that I often would see sales leaders make mistakes with is that they kind of hold their view, but they don't back it up with data, and therefore kind of the credibility, to Marina's point, becomes under question because it seems more subjective than objective. And so I love what you were talking about there with if you're to the question of, if you're a person listening along to this and you're thinking, what traits, what skills, what characteristics do I need to be a great sales leader? Even if you're not a data orientated person now, it's going to be a handicap for you if you move into leadership and you don't embrace data to underpin all of what you probably are your good hypothesis and insights that you have from being a naturally astute person. But yeah, really digging into that data. So I love how the two kind of things came together. That's really good. And then Penny, was there anything that the panelists missed out there? Anything you'd add to that as a trait or anything like that?
I think what everyone was talking about at some point was empathy. So being so certain of the skills I think about when I think about looking at people to promote within the team, because data is super important, absolutely agree. And seeing someone how they manage their book and use data to make insights and grow their own business is nice to see as a good leading indicator. Another one is being curious. So, being curious and open-minded to learning new ways and being open to coaching is a good sign for someone wanting to move into leadership. And empathy, as I said, so actually caring about other people, caring about your team, caring about your business, is super important. And I think it gets undersold quite a lot, empathy. But when you're managing, you do need to care and team first. I think everyone here has kind of said that. And being calm and fair, probably. The amount of times I've wanted to run around and, because as a manager, you get a lot of problems thrown at you, right? And so invariably trying to put that, it's like those, what do they say, ducks, where your feet are going mad underneath, but you're super calm at the top. That's kind of the exterior we have to have.
It's so funny because I would always recruit what I'd say are the 5 C's, which I think is nothing new, but I'd look for curiosity, which is the first one, craving, the craft, meaning that the person's kind of ability to the craft of sales, their coachability, and how well of a culture fit they are. And just as you were talking there, that was kind of my criteria for SDRs and AEs. But actually, I think what you were really saying there is actually that transcends, and to be a good sales leader, you have to have those things. Obviously, the craft is the credibility. Like, you've been here, you've done it before, you know how to help people move deals forward. Obviously, that comes back to curiosity. And so all those things is really kind of interesting to think about what, to my earlier sort of opening gambit for this part of the question, which was to suggest that good salespeople can't be good sales leader, or they're not automatically a good sales leader. There is actually more parallel there than I think that adage would say, which is interesting. There's a question from Julia Townsend, and I'm going to try a button here. That seems to work. So it says, are there any leadership training programs now in place at the Panelist organizations? And I know from the earlier sort of, we touched on this a little bit where we said there wasn't much in the way of training there. So what I'll say is, Panelist, answer this question from a perspective of sort of formal training. But if there wasn't something for you, I'd love to know whether there's maybe been someone or a type of, some sort of support, maybe a mentor or something like that supported with that as well. I'll go to you, Marina.
Yeah, so at Zscaler, we are unbelievably lucky. So there is a new initiative, and actually I should have mentioned it at the beginning, where our top sales leader, so used to run the whole of EMEA for us, has now moved out of go-to-market and revenue-based activity to literally only focus on leadership development. So we are now, and I know it's very rare in this industry particularly, but it is a massive investment. We do bi-weekly trainings for an hour every week on certain topics. And then we did our first offsite earlier this quarter. And, things that we all agreed you're not trained for before you move into it. So Penny mentioned, one-to-one, how to use data without using it as a micromanagement tool, how to inspire, coach, then inspect, like all of the things that you read in these books that come out. We are kind of going through in very practical examples. And I feel very fortunate to have been put in that leadership program. I think the other thing, Zscaler also are pretty good at looking after leaders. So I have an executive coach that Zscaler pay for. And I meet with her either once or twice a week, which is quite a lot to get a kind of, external perspective on things. And then naturally for me, I've always been very people focused. So I've had a number of mentors. And in fact, when I moved to Zscaler, I didn't even know what Zscaler did. But one of the people that had been my leader in my previous organization said, you need to, not sign that contract that you've got on the table and come with me and we'll tell you what it is later on. And so, mentors are super important as well.
Wow. I love that. Lucy, what do you think?
Yeah, so pretty similar. So at Datadog, we have leadership training. Obviously in COVID, it was remote, but we do a 3-day when you first get promoted, and that's for all new leaders and also promoted leaders. We do try and put those people that are kind of like those shining stars onto those leadership trainings a little bit earlier to give them that exposure to kind of see, is it something that would float their boat? We then have, I have kind of monthly calls with mentors, and also I rely quite heavily on the leadership above me. So we've got obviously the VP of EMEA. We do a lot of group leadership calls across all the regions now as well. Formalized, we use a lot of platforms. And actually at SCO this year, we're going to be having a leadership day on day one, which is quite exciting. I've never worked in an organization where they've done that. We do get really good support. But I think with anything, when you're new, you just have to kind of go into it and learn from your mistakes a little bit. Because you can read all the books in the world. And I said, I've got all the books above me. Read all the books in the world. But unless you've actually put it into practice yourself and learn from your mistakes, I don't think there's any book that can tell you how to do it perfectly.
Interesting. Pim, what about you, Pim? Like you, obviously you're, I think that's amazing what Lucy and Marina have there of sort of on site, so to speak, support. What have you seen?
No, that sounds great. I don't necessarily have a similar sort of experience. So the way that in the absence of a formal process being in place, I would approach it as a deal, right? And then the opportunity would be the step up in terms of my role. And so I'd identify a champion and the actual economic buyer, but also backups for those roles, because people move around and move away to other companies, right? And I would really try to understand, hey, in my current profile, what are some of the gaps that I can work on while I'm still in my current role, working towards that next role. So I guess that, approaching it like you would with a deal was really helpful in the absence of formal training and development programs being in place.
You're figuring out what the decision criteria, the role that you want is. The hiring managers,
or influence them, right? So
like you can tell you're a MEDDICC guy, Pim. I love it. That's excellent stuff. What about you, Penny? I know you've worked at big companies and some smaller companies where I imagine you've probably had resources to call upon, and then other times you had to probably be a bit more sort of scrappy. What's your thoughts about this?
It's a mix, right? So in one of my companies, they decided to invest in sales leadership, which I've now realized is critical for the success of growth of the company. That investment can make the biggest impact on a sales team. And they had a sales playbook that was built for them, which learned how do you do a one-to-one templated, how do you run a QBR, how do you run a sales meeting. So I was very lucky. Then went to a startup and there was nothing, right? So thankfully I had that template to go with me. But in the absence of that, for anyone on this listening into this, I would say I'm going to do a plug here for a business that is not my own. It's Pavilion. And Pavilion is a membership community. It's a community basically of all the sort of top sellers in the SaaS community. You can pay a membership fee, and within that, people will share. Actually, that success template that I just talked about actually is on there. And in fact, what people can do then is they do some courses that you can do, and also they have some templates of best practice. So in the absence of nothing, that's a good place to start. I think the next thing is, I love what Pim said. I just want to go on that because that was what I was thinking. When I look at the team for people who want to come forward and be managers, I would be encouraging people to go to their manager and say, look, I want to develop myself. I want to think about how I can learn. These are the attributes I have. What can I do in the team now to support you that will demonstrate and give me a forum or a platform to show to you that I can be invested in this path? And so I would be probably doing that as well. There are formal courses. There's Myers-Briggs. There's also Kellogg School of Training for Sales in the States. There's lots of others, but they're quite expensive. So,
yeah, if I can just chime into that, like I'm familiar with the platform as well, Penny. I found some great mentoring there actually. So I echo what you said there. And also, when you do that, you have to be or at least that's the way that I did. I was super conscious of the relationship with the leader of the team that I was still part of, right? Because when you go and do all these things, like you're indicating that you want to step up, and that immediately impacts them as well. And they should be, like your leader at that time should also be measured in a way to promote individuals out of their team onto next leadership roles, right? But it is sort of like a balance that you want to be mindful about so that you don't, I guess in the absence of a better word, overstep that and just be open and transparent and collaborative about it.
Yeah, and I just want to add one other thing. Both Marina and Lucy talked about coaches and mentors, critically important, right? So I've had a coach my whole career, and they've changed as I've changed roles, but they've been really, really helpful. And then a mentor, obviously, two different things. Pay for the coach, don't for the mentor. But I think it's also choosing the right mentor as well and having the right cadence and relationship with them. That's really important.
I love that. Yeah, spot on. One of the things I'll add as well, just to sort of wrap up this point around enablement and those types of things, is that we think a lot about leadership from a MEDDICC perspective, which I know a lot of our audience are obviously aligned to that. And we think it's as much around creating kind of a culture, a positive team culture, as it is around sort of having those kind of hands-on actionable sales leadership traits of, knowing deal craft and knowing how to kind of manage the cadences of one-to-ones, QBRs and all that sort of stuff. And the thing that we see time and time again that kind of gets overlooked is this approach of trying to build a sales team culture that's based upon trust, where the foundation layer of everything we do as a team is, hey, you're in my team, and by virtue of you being in my team, I appreciate and value you, that you can do the job that you're here to do, basically sell. You know how to sell. And I think that is so often, it seems such a silly, obvious thing, but it's so often overlooked in the way that we as sales leaders are taught to kind of manage our teams. What I mean by that is we kind of ask lots of questions to kind of question the salesperson's perspective of the deal and things like that, rather than sort of coming from a position of, I'm assuming that you've done everything right here. And guess what? Sales is just sometimes not easy. And sometimes we have challenges with our deals. And my job as the sales leader is to work with you and help you highlight those challenges and overcome them. So for me and for us, and it's part of our leadership enablement program, is we're so strong on that whole perspective of the foundation level of everything you should do is to build the trust of your team. So but in the most basic, straightforward example, that if one person in your sales team has got a challenge, whether it's a challenge with a deal, whether it's a challenge with something they don't know how to do, they don't think they're strong at, they feel like they can put their hand up because they trust that you trust them to be a good part of the team. So you can kind of get to resolving those things quickly together. And so that for me is a really, really important part of this side of things and how we do it. So yeah, and I think mentors are really helpful in kind of getting you to see. Sometimes I think as a sales leader, you can be so close to the numbers, the deals, the target, that actually if you zoom out, there's some real value to be had there. So something on the mentors thing, actually, because I think we've talked a lot about sort of moving into the role, and I feel like so many, I can talk to myself here. I know when I talk for the panel as well, so many of you have been sort of lifted by mentors in your career. And if we can kind of go with maybe a MEDDICC stance here of champions that have perhaps been sort of career champions, I'd love to know whether any of the panel have any examples of people that they're perhaps classed as champions in their career, and how people listening could find somebody like that for themselves. Marina, what do you think?
Do you want to go, Penny? Sorry, you had your hand up. Yeah, of course. So I think they're probably the most important thing that you could possibly have in your career. Just the same as a deal, unless you have someone truly championing you, that believes in you, that trusts you, it will be very difficult to get anywhere, particularly in these, MEDDICC hyper growth companies that, most of us work in. I also think the trusting is so important. I would agree with you, Andy. I think if that's not there, it's just not going to work, right? People won't tell you things. You won't be able to find bad news early. They won't trust you to do any of that. But my view on so champions are really important. That's back to your question. But my view on what you can tell or how you quantify whether someone is an incredible leader or not is by the people that follow them to the next organization. That's always been my measure of success, right? So whenever I was weighing up whether I go and work for a certain RD, whether it should be a certain CRO that I go and follow, it's always how many people believed in that person so much that they went to the next organization with them. And I think for me personally, when I left App Dynamics, I'd actually signed a contract at a different SaaS organization. And the champions of me, and I was very junior in my career then, called me and said, Marina, I can't describe to you, no one, so I think they said, no one can put a price on moving into an organization where people already trust and respect what you do, and not having to go out and build that again will be such an enormous, cornerstone to your career. And genuinely, that was probably the best advice I ever got given. And, my career has been very short in comparison to most of the people on this call, but very fast. And I genuinely believe that the reason for that is the champions that I've had and the trust that they've had in me to go and deliver a good job.
I love that, Marie. I feel like as you were saying that, I feel like we need to coin a term for that sort of scenario where you've got that cluster of people that go places together and just kind of crush it. Because I think that is such a big thing. And anyone listening to this who's perhaps earlier in your career and you're thinking, well, actually, I've got a few situations like that, but I'm just haven't got enough years to kind of attach to people that have gone on to build these networks. That's okay, because all you have to do is look for the roles that you're interviewing for. Ask the person who you're going to work for, like, who else is here that's worked together before, and you if it's the right place, you open up like a labyrinth of, well, that person's here and worked there with that person before, and before you know it, you've found either like good people follow good people, bad people don't tend to follow bad people, they tend to like disperse out and don't get into the organizations where the good people are. So.
And I'll just add one more thing, whenever I talk to my team around, a lot of what we do is around like, what is our team goal over a year, right? Instead of concentrating on every single individual contributor, what are we going to do together? But they always say, what's your aim, Marina? Like, what do you care about? And I'm like, I want to build a legacy where whatever company that I go to, every single one of you will follow me, even if you don't even know where you're signing up to go. And I think that is, I think that would be a great outcome for any leader.
I love that. Legacy over currency, right? That's one of my favorite Gary Vaynerchuk sayings. Yeah. Penny, you had something to say on this topic.
Well, I'm glad I didn't talk first because that was great. I completely agree with you, Marina. It's amazing. And what a legacy. And in fact, that's what I did when I've been looking for roles, is always look at how many people follow. And in fact, it's an interview question we ask sales managers when we think about people coming across. It's an interesting one because I actually look at champions and look back at my career and think I didn't really have any internal champions. In some of my industries earlier on, I was in financial services, they're actually quite male dominated. And there was, I hate to say it, there were, a bunch of guys that would move together, and it was quite difficult sometimes to infiltrate. A number of sort of 15 years ago, we're talking, it's quite difficult. What's amazing about my current role is I can finally say in my career that I have that in my CEO, who's female, not because she's female, but it is nice that she's female, Melissa Di Donato, and she's an awesome inspirational woman. And when I was looking at roles and thinking about that, wanting to follow, she has a lot of people that followed her. And actually, I met her through some charity work. So I was very intentional about reaching out to her. I'd seen someone who I admired, who wasn't necessarily in my organization, but I wanted to somehow figure a way to interact with her. And through her charity, actually, which is building confidence in young children at school, free programs to schools called Inner Wings. So I met her through that. And then as a result of it, actually started seeing the culture she was building in SUSE. And so that therefore, interesting, when I was looking at the roles, and Marina, you were saying the same thing, I ended up going to SUSE because I could see the people she was bringing with her and the culture she was setting. So she's almost become my internal champion. I've been there 5 months, been promoted already. And she's always saying to me, Penny, what can you do more? How can you push more? She's always driving me to the next thing, which I've never had. So yeah, it's really important to have a champion if you can.
I love that. I love that. There's a great question from Lauren, which I'll put up on the screen. It says, if you start as an individual contributor in a new company, then move to leadership, how do you ensure the team that you will manage in the future respect you as a leader, even if they are stronger individual contributors? Pim, I'm going to come to you for this one because I know that this is something that you've done. You've taken the promotion and managed the team you've worked for before. It's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question, right? It's an interesting situation as well if you find yourself in that. And what I found is that it goes back to, I think, what some of us and what I was saying as well at the beginning of this session. If you sort of already do some of the leadership things without having the title, and even by extension of that, help some of the individuals that are part of the same team, it will be easier for them to sort of naturally see you transitioning into that role, right? And accept the fact that you're now the leader of that team. And then I guess the other thing, especially considering the context of this question, is to be transparent around it, right? And say like, hey, you're doing a great job and I just want to help you become even better at what you're already great at. And that's going to be my role in sort of the partnership that we have together.
I love that. I love that. Lucy, I'm not going to put you on the spot to talk about your current team because I know you're managing your current team, but just expanding what Pim said there in terms of if you're advising somebody who has made that step up, maybe yourself 19 months ago, you're whispering in your ear, what kind of things would you say to the person who's going to go and manage their own team?
I think we hit it on the top of the call, right? Which is just because you're a great salesperson doesn't make you a great leader. And it could be the inverse of that you may be a great leader, but maybe not in the top percentile of being a great salesperson because the traits and the what you need day to day are very, very different. I think that it's all about trust. It's about, which I think Marina spoke about, is about building the team up, but also showing that you really care about what they do and their progression. And also like have the confidence, like you wouldn't be in that role unless you had champions or others around you that thought you were capable of it. But it is really tricky, especially when you get promoted from within, because there's always, if everyone's gone for the role and then you've been selected, that's one thing. But if you've just been kind of approached and been kind of moved into that role and it wasn't ever on your kind of growth trajectory or whatever in the first place, it can be really tricky. But I think it's, one thing I would do is personally, if that was your position, I would go and take each of those individuals who are in your current team out for lunch, have a conversation about why you've moved into that role, what your ideas are on what you bring to the team, and also where your strengths are. But then also fall back on that stronger IC because you're going to need them in your team to be successful. So then start using them to kind of help lead sessions or use them to kind of as a sounding board because it makes them feel important at the same time also.
Yeah, I love that. I love that big time. I think that's, and I think also just having that open communication to say, you know, this is, you know, one of the things that I always remember about being a sales leader was that there was no better feeling for me than if I had someone in my team that was better at doing something than I would be if I was in their shoes. That's like one of the best feelings in the world. But I remember sort of having this realization that actually I don't share how good that feels as a leader. And imagine if you're the AE, if you're working in this person's team alongside them, and that person turns around and says to you, you know what, that's the best way, that's the best I've ever seen anyone do that, or you know, you do that so much better than I would. I feel like I'm learning from you. I think like going back to that trust, that kind of open culture thing, I think, and to Lauren's point there around, you know, even if the individual contributors are stronger than you, Lucy nailed it there. It's, you know, we're not trying to be the best sales people in this role, trying to be the best sales leaders. So I think it's a really good way of putting it. What do you think, Penny? Is there anything?
I would love to have 6 people that are the best of the best, 10 times better than I'll ever be, right? Because I know then the team will be stronger. So that would be my legacy, would be to have people that are 10 times better than I ever was as an IC.
Be some team, Lucy. Be some team. I wouldn't want to be competing against you, put it that way. But yeah, absolutely right. What do you think, Penny?
I mean, I did go into management a few years ago. My first management role was actually with my peers, and I was lucky in that I had, you know, I was a top performer, so that helped. But I don't necessarily think that made it easier. I think what I had to do was not micromanage, respect them for who they are as their personalities. I'm not coming in here and as I said, I'm meant to be unlocking things for them. So if I'm there to serve them and make their life easier, so be it. And just as to Lucy's point, I love strong ICs that are better than me. Bring it on, fabulous. All I want to do is unlock even more potential for them and help them win more for everyone. So if I can do that, and if that's a combination of coaching or unblocking barriers or getting marketing to work with them, whatever it might be. But also I think there's an element of what I could offer is then coaching and help for them to move. Perhaps there might be areas that they need support on, and maybe I can connect them with mentors or myself, or help them move into leadership themselves if they're interested.
Yeah, I love that. I think one of the funny things is that, you know, me, I love my sports analogies. And I think if you think about the greatest sports managers, leaders, whatever you want to call it, you know, if we go with the football theme of, you know, Jose Mourinho, Arsene Wenger, Sir Alex Ferguson, I'm sure there's the same in every sport you look. They weren't the best players. In many cases, Jose Mourinho, I don't think he even played professionally. And what makes them better is how, to your point, Penny, they can get the best from everybody else around them. So I think, Lauren, that's a tremendous question. But if someone like you are listening to this and you're thinking about, you know, how do you shape up against the others? If you've got all the traits we've talked about as a leader of wanting to build other people up and all those other good traits, then I think that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all, as long as you're kind of open and honest about it. Is there anything you would add on this point, Marina?
No, I think we've covered most of it.
Good stuff. All right, we have just under 5 minutes left. There's one question left I've seen, which I think will be a good one from Fabiola at Go Cardus, which is, what skill set as an individual contributor would you say has been invaluable to you as a leader? So what things as a leader really kind of helped you be successful in leadership? I'll go to Pim.
Yeah. So as a leader, I think the understanding of what the role is that your team is doing is for me has always been a plus. So I typically haven't been a leader of a team where I wasn't an IC before. So that's a little bit of a caveat to the answer here. And then in terms of the overall topic of this call, I would again say, like, the way that you sort of shape up as an IC and the way that you're able to put a deal together will also help you to get the role that you want if you are able to approach it as a deal. Further skill set. Yeah, I think it's been said in different ways in this call before, where you think about the bigger picture for the team, right? The bigger goal, the sort of the accountability that you have as a collective. And I think that if you have that as part of your skill set, it will definitely get you there quicker to being a good leader.
I love that. Marina, what would you say?
I would say that I guess it's not really about skill set, right? I think there are two types of reps, probably not just two, there's probably loads, but two I'm going to talk about. One is like, a lone wolf who does everything by themselves, owns the process, doesn't necessarily ask for help. I would say that is not necessarily the characteristics that make a great leader. I think people who are constantly wanting to develop, looking for coaching, get help outside of just their own leader, are able to leverage marketing, the channel, their SDR function, everyone, to get the best outcome for their wider team. Those are the people, in my opinion, that make fantastic leaders. It's not really a skill set answer, I guess, but I think that would be my view.
Yeah, spot on. Penny, what do you think?
I think they are kind of skill sets, aren't they? I mean, I think I'm not far off. Good communication, good listening. So both of those things are really important when you sell, right? You've got to listen to your customers to understand what they care about and communicate value prop and measure those together. I think when you're managing people, it's really important to listen and not jump in. I have to work at that. I think sometimes salespeople do like to talk. I'm one of those. So holding back and trying to really listen and absorb and try and see it from their point of view. And then communication, which is taking that calm, considered approach and being able to think about how you communicate to your manager that is going to the person in your team who's going to motivate them, make them feel listened and heard, which is what we do with customers, right? So to build that trust. So that's probably what I talk about.
Love that. And Lucy, final word on this one, please.
I would probably go emotional intelligence. I think you need to have that intelligence as to when to press someone's buttons and when not to, and be able to kind of back off if there's a problem. I actually really like what Marina said about the team thing as well. Like, we're a massive kind of culture of win together, lose together. The lone wolves who kind of sit on their own trying to do everything, you're probably not going to get very far. So using your ecosystem around you, but if you're in the trenches with your team, you win it or you lose it, but it's no one's fault, right? Things happen, you lose it together. So I think that awareness of being able to kind of get in the trenches and get your fight, which you are going to have anyway, because obviously you've probably been in a sales role previously, so you should have that fight anyway. And then also I think Pim touched on it around process. I'm quite process driven, and I think if there is a repeatable process that you've used as an IC, that you can then just go and like supersize it as a leader and then kind of flow down that process to your team. They then add their own bits to it, like bring your own self to work and bring your ideas to work. It will be 10 times better, which means that they should be 10 times more successful. But don't mend something that's not broken, but make it better.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much. That brings us to full time, going with the football theme. Thank you so much to everyone that's tuned in for this. It of course wouldn't have been possible without you. It also wouldn't have been possible without our four fantastic panelists. So thank you so much, Penny, Pim, Marina, and Lucy, for tuning in. We've dropped our LinkedIn company profile in the chat. That's the best way if you want to catch up with any other future events we do like this. But yeah, thank you once again. This will be recorded. There's so many best bits from this. But yeah, just thank you once again. I'm so grateful that you all joined us, and have a great rest of your day, and may your champions be strong.
Thank you.
Thanks
everyone.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.